The gunshots shattered the silence of the dusty Colorado frontier town, sending Dustin Zachary diving for cover behind a weathered water trough as bullets splintered the wood above his head. It was 1875, and he'd ridden into Broken Creek expecting nothing more than a hot meal and a bed for the night, not a shootout between rival cattle factions that had erupted just as he was tying up his horse. "Damn it all," he muttered, drawing his Colt revolver and checking the chamber. After 6 months on the trail driving cattle from Texas to Colorado, he'd hoped his first stop in civilization would be peaceful. The former Union cavalry officer had seen enough bloodshed during the war to last several lifetimes, and the years since had done little to ease those memories. Across the street, 3 men in dusty range clothes were pinned down behind an overturned wagon, returning fire toward the saloon where at least 4 others were shooting from windows and doorways. The air was thick with gunsmoke and the acrid smell of fear. Dustin had no dog in this fight. He was just passing through, looking to start fresh somewhere in Colorado's expanding frontier. His trail boss had paid him well after the drive, and he'd been contemplating using his savings to stake a claim on some land, maybe start his own small ranch. He sure hadn't planned on dying in someone else's quarrel. The shooting intensified, and then he heard a sound that froze his blood. A child's cry, high and frightened, coming from the middle of the street. Peering cautiously over the trough, Dustin spotted a small boy, no more than 3 years old, sitting in the dirt directly between the warring factions. The child was covered in dust, his face streaked with tears, wailing in terror as bullets whistled overhead. "Hold your fire." Dustin shouted, but his voice was drowned in the cacophony of gunshots. Without further hesitation, he bolted from behind his cover, sprinting toward the child. Time seemed to slow as he ran, his spurs jingling with each desperate stride. Someone shouted, and for a moment, the gunfire hesitated just long enough for Dustin to reach the boy. He scooped the child into his arms in one fluid motion, not breaking stride as he raced toward the nearest building, the general store, and crashed through its door, shielding the small body with his own. Inside, he pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, the child clutched tightly to his chest. The boy's sobs had quieted to hiccuping whimpers, his tiny hands clutching Dustin's shirt. "It's all right now, little one," Dustin murmured, his heart still racing. "You're safe." The store owner, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose, emerged from behind his counter, eyes wide. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he said. Dustin ignored him, focusing on the child in his arms. The boy was thin, with a mop of dark hair and eyes the color of summer skies. His clothes were worn but clean, or had been before he'd ended up in the street. "What's your name, son?" Dustin asked gently, setting the boy on a barrel of flour to get a better look at him. The child just stared, lower lip trembling. "He might be too scared to talk," the shopkeeper offered, "or too young, poor little fella." He peered closer at the child. "Wait, isn't that the Miller boy, Samantha Miller's son?" Dustin frowned. "Who's Samantha Miller?" "Young widow woman. Lives about a mile outside town with her boy. She comes in for supplies every few weeks." The shopkeeper's brow furrowed. If the child's here alone, something might be wrong. She'd never let him wander off. A commotion outside drew their attention. The shooting had stopped, replaced by shouting and the sound of running feet. Through the window, Dustin could see the town sheriff and several deputies rounding up the combatants. "I'd better get this little one back to his mother," Dustin said, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Which direction is the Miller place?" "North of town. Follow the creek about a mile until you reach a stand of cottonwoods. Small cabin there." The shopkeeper hesitated. "But mister, I should tell you," whatever warning the man intended was cut short by renewed shouting outside. The sheriff was at the door, demanding everyone come out with their hands visible. Dustin sighed, lifting the boy again. "Looks like we need to clear things up with the law first, partner." Sheriff Daniel Hodge was a tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and eyes that had seen too much. He listened carefully as Dustin explained how he'd rescued the child from the street. "That was a damn fool thing to do," the sheriff said finally, but I reckon that boy would be dead if you hadn't. The Reed boys and the Claytons have been itching for a fight for months now." He knelt down to the child's level. "Hello there, Tobias, where's your mama?" The boy's face crumpled again, fresh tears welling. "Mama's sick," he managed between sobs. The sheriff straightened, concern evident on his weathered face. "Samantha's been looking after that boy alone since her husband died in a mining accident 2 years back. Fine woman. If she's ill enough that the boy wandered off." He didn't finish the thought. Dustin felt something twist in his chest, a strange pull of concern for a woman he'd never met. "I'll take him home," he found himself saying. "Make sure she's all right." The sheriff studied him. "You're not from around here?" "No, sir, just passing through. Name's Dustin Zachary, late of Texas, a cattleman. Was looking to settle now." The sheriff seemed to come to a decision. "I'd take the boy myself, but I've got a mess to clean up here. 5 men wounded, property damaged." He sighed heavily. "You seem decent enough, Zachary. My deputy can lend you a wagon. The Miller place is no distance at all, but it'll be easier with the boy." 30 minutes later, Dustin found himself driving a borrowed wagon along a rutted trail, the child Tobias sitting beside him, quiet now but occasionally sniffling. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grassland, painting the distant mountains gold. "Is your mama very sick, Tobias?" Dustin asked gently. The boy nodded solemnly. "Mama fell down, wouldn't wake up." His small face pinched with worry. "I tried to help, then I got scared." Dustin's concern deepened. The child must have wandered away seeking help when his mother collapsed. He flicked the reins, urging the horses to a faster pace. They crested a small rise, and Dustin saw the cottonwoods the shopkeeper had mentioned, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. Beside them stood a modest cabin with a small barn and corral. Smoke drifted from the chimney, which Dustin took as an encouraging sign. As they approached, Dustin saw a figure stumble from the cabin door, a woman clutching the doorframe for support. Even from a distance, he could see she was in distress. "Mama," Tobias cried, trying to stand in the wagon. Dustin scooped the boy up with one arm while bringing the wagon to a halt with the other. He jumped down, Tobias in his arms, and hurried toward the cabin. The woman, Samantha Miller, he presumed took a faltering step forward. She was young, perhaps 25, with chestnut hair tumbling around pale features. Her eyes, bright with fever, fixed on her son with desperate relief. "Tobias," she breathed, reaching for him. "Oh, thank God." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Dustin lunged forward, somehow managing to catch her with his free arm while still holding the boy. For a moment he stood there, a woman unconscious against his chest, her child clinging to his neck, and felt the strange sense that his life had just changed irrevocably. "Mama's hot," Tobias whispered, his small hand touching his mother's flushed cheek. "Yes, she is," Dustin agreed grimly. "Let's get her inside." The cabin interior was neat but sparse, a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and shelves holding modest provisions. Dustin carried Samantha to the bed behind the curtain, laying her gently on the patchwork quilt while Tobias hovered anxiously. Samantha's forehead burned against his palm. Fever, and a high one at that. Dustin had seen enough trail sickness to recognize the danger. "Tobias, does your mama have any medicine?" he asked, turning to the worried child. The boy pointed to a small shelf where a few bottles stood. None of them looked like proper medicine to Dustin. He'd need to cool her down first, then ride back to town for the doctor. "I need your help, partner," he told Tobias. "Can you show me where the water is?" The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dustin found the well, filled buckets, and set about trying to lower Samantha's fever with cool cloths. He built up the fire in the stove, heated soup from a pot he found there, and coaxed Tobias to eat while keeping watch over the unconscious woman. As night fell, Dustin faced a dilemma. Samantha needed a doctor, but he couldn't leave her alone with just the child, nor could he take her and Tobias into town in her condition. The fever hadn't broken despite his efforts. The decision was made for him when hoofbeats approached the cabin. Dustin's hand went to his pistol as he stepped to the door. Sheriff Hodge dismounted, another horse trailing behind his. "Thought I'd better check on things," he called. "Brought the doctor, too." Relief washed over Dustin as the second rider, a middle-aged man with a black bag, dismounted. "She's running a high fever," Dustin reported. "Hasn't woken properly since I got here." The doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Howard, went immediately to Samantha's bedside while Dustin explained what he'd done so far. "You did right," the doctor said after examining her. "It's influenza, I'd wager. Been several cases in town." He opened his bag, extracting various bottles and instruments. "She's young and strong, should pull through with proper care." "I can stay," Dustin heard himself say. "To help, I mean." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Thought you were just passing through." Dustin glanced at Tobias, who had fallen asleep in a chair despite his worry, exhausted from the day's events. Some things are more important than moving on. After giving instructions for Samantha's care, the doctor prepared to leave, promising to return the next day. The sheriff lingered. "You sure about this, Zachary?" he asked quietly. "Taking responsibility for a woman and child you don't even know," Dustin gazed at Samantha's feverish form. "I'm sure, Sheriff, I can't explain it, but—" He shrugged, unable to articulate the strange compulsion he felt to protect this small family. "Well, Samantha Miller's respected in these parts, strong woman, raising that boy alone after losing James. She doesn't take charity, mind you." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "But help freely given between neighbors, that's different. I understand. I'll send word to the widow Parsons. She'll likely come help tomorrow. Not right for a single man to be caring for a lady otherwise." Dustin nodded, appreciating the sheriff's concern for propriety. "Thank you." After they left, Dustin gently moved Tobias to the small trundle bed that was clearly his, then settled himself in a chair positioned to watch over both mother and son. The night stretched long before him, punctuated by the occasional need to change the cooling cloths on Samantha's forehead or give her sips of water when she stirred. Sometime in the darkest part of night, she opened her eyes, momentarily lucid. "Who?" she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "Dustin Zachary, madam," he replied softly. "Your boy was in some trouble in town. I brought him home and found you ill." Her fever-bright eyes searched his face. "Tobias, is he?" "He's fine, sleeping now." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you," she breathed, before slipping back into restless slumber. Dawn brought a soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Dustin, who dozed fitfully in the chair, awoke to find Tobias standing beside him, small hand on his arm. "Is Mama better?" the boy asked, his voice small with worry. Dustin checked Samantha, noting with relief that her skin felt cooler. "I think she might be, partner. Let's get you some breakfast, and then we'll see about making your mama more comfortable." As promised, Widow Parsons arrived mid-morning, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who immediately took charge of the sickroom. She shooed Dustin outside, instructing him to see to the animals and fetch more firewood tasks he was glad to tackle while she tended to the more intimate aspects of Samantha's care. The small barn housed a milk cow, some chickens, and a solid-looking mare. The animals had clearly been neglected during Samantha's illness, and Dustin set about feeding and watering them, repairing a broken board in the chicken coop and mucking out stalls. Tobias followed him like a shadow, eager to help in his small way. "Mama and me do chores together," the boy explained solemnly, carrying a tiny bucket of chicken feed. "But I'm the man of the house now." The words, coming from such a small child, squeezed something in Dustin's chest. "That's a big job for a little fella," he said gently. Tobias nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "Papa's in heaven. Sheriff Hodge said so." Dustin knelt to the child's level. "Well, how about I help you with the man-of-the-house jobs until your mama's feeling better?" The boy's face brightened. "Yes, please." By late afternoon, Dustin had chopped enough wood to last a week, repaired several loose boards on the cabin's porch, and even managed to hunt a rabbit for supper. Widow Parsons reported that Samantha's fever had broken, though she remained very weak. "She'll need looking after for at least a week," the older woman said as she prepared to leave. I can come mornings, but I've my own place to tend. I'll manage the rest, Dustin assured her. He'd already decided to stay until Samantha was fully recovered. The trail could wait. That evening, after Widow Parsons departed, Dustin sat at Samantha's bedside while Tobias played quietly on the floor with wooden toys that Dustin suspected had been made by the boy's father. "Mr. Zachary," Samantha's voice, though weak, was clear. Dustin looked up to find her watching him, her eyes lucid for the first time. "Mrs. Miller, you're awake." She attempted to sit up and he helped her, arranging pillows behind her back. "How long have I been ill?" "At least 2 days, by my reckoning. Your boy found his way to town yesterday." At the mention of Tobias, her gaze sharpened with alarm. "Is he Mama?" Tobias, hearing his mother's voice, scrambled to his feet and rushed to the bed. "You're awake." The reunion between mother and child brought an unexpected lump to Dustin's throat. He stepped back, giving them privacy, but Samantha caught his eye over her son's head. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. He nodded, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the stove. Over the following days, as Samantha slowly regained her strength, Dustin fell into an unexpected routine at the Miller homestead. Mornings began with chores: milking the cow, feeding animals, fetching water, often with Tobias's eager if not entirely helpful assistance. Widow Parsons would arrive to help Samantha with personal matters. Then Dustin would take over care of both mother and son for the afternoon and evening. By the 4th day, Samantha was strong enough to sit at the table for meals, though she tired quickly. By the 6th, she could move around the cabin, though Dustin insisted she rest frequently. They talked during these quiet times, he telling her of his years as a cavalryman and later a cowhand, she speaking of her life before Colorado, growing up in St. Louis, marrying young and following her husband west. James had gold fever, she explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Tobias was already asleep inside. "We came out here 4 years ago with such dreams. He built this cabin with his own hands, but the mining," she sighed. "The gold never materialized. He was working as a blaster when the accident happened." "I'm sorry," Dustin said softly. She nodded, accepting his sympathy with quiet dignity. "We had a good life, short as it was." "And I have Tobias." Her gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "I've kept us going since then. It hasn't been easy, but we manage." Dustin studied her profile, struck by the quiet strength in her features. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Miller." A slight flush colored her cheeks. "Samantha, please, and you're a remarkable man, Mr. Zachary. Not many would stop to help a child in danger. Fewer still would care for strangers as you have." "Dustin," he corrected, "and I'm no saint, just happened to be in the right place." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "I don't believe that. I think you're exactly where you're meant to be." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. The next morning, as Dustin was splitting wood behind the cabin, Sheriff Hodge rode up, dismounting with a nod of greeting. "Mrs. Miller on the mend?" he asked. "Getting stronger every day," Dustin confirmed, setting down his axe. The sheriff seemed pleased. "Good to hear. Brought news you might be interested in. Jameson's looking to sell his spread about 3 miles east of here. Nothing fancy, small house, decent grazing land, some timber. Said he's heading back east to care for his ailing mother." Dustin raised an eyebrow. "Why tell me?" "Thought you mentioned wanting to settle hereabouts. It's a fair price for good land. Might suit a man looking to start fresh." The idea took root immediately in Dustin's mind. He'd been considering his next steps, knowing he couldn't justify staying at the Miller place indefinitely, despite his growing attachment to both Samantha and Tobias. The boy had taken to calling him Mr. Dusty and following him everywhere, soaking up attention like parched ground in a rainstorm. And Samantha? Each day revealed new facets of her character that he admired: her resilience, her gentle humor, the fierce love she had for her son. "I'd be interested in seeing it," Dustin said. The sheriff smiled knowingly. "Figured you might be. I'll let Jameson know." After the sheriff left, Dustin found Samantha in the garden, kneeling despite his protests that she should rest, pulling weeds from around young vegetable plants. "The sheriff tells me there's a place for sale nearby," he said, kneeling beside her to help. "I'm thinking of having a look," her hands stilled. "You're staying in Colorado, then?" "I'd like to." He focused on the soil, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her eyes. "I've been drifting since the war ended. Might be time to put down roots." "I think," she said carefully, "that would be a fine thing. Tobias would miss you terribly if you left." "Just Tobias." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Now she was the one studying the ground intently. "I've grown accustomed to your company as well, Dustin." It wasn't a declaration of affection, but it was enough to kindle hope in his chest. The Jameson place turned out to be better than Dustin had dared hope. A sturdy two-room cabin, a small but sound barn, 60 acres of mixed grazing land and forest, with a year-round spring. The price was fair, especially considering the money he'd saved from years of cowhand work. By week's end, he'd agreed to terms, signed papers in town, and officially become a landowner for the first time in his life. "We should celebrate," Samantha insisted when he returned to her cabin with the news. She was nearly fully recovered now, though still thinner than she should be. "I'll bake a pie." While she worked in the kitchen, Dustin sat on the floor with Tobias, helping the boy build an elaborate fort from sticks they'd collected that morning. "Mr. Dusty, are you going away now?" Tobias asked suddenly, his small face serious. Dustin's heart clenched. "I'll be living at my own place now, but it's not far, just over that ridge." He pointed eastward. "You and your mama can visit anytime." The boy's lower lip quivered. "But who will help Mama? Who will tell me stories?" From the kitchen, Dustin heard a small intake of breath. Samantha had heard. "I'll still come visit," Dustin promised. "And when you're bigger, maybe you can help me with my ranch. Would you like that?" The distraction worked. Tobias's eyes widened. "Will you have horses?" "A few, and cattle once I get established." "Like a real cowboy," Dustin laughed. "That's the idea." Later, after Tobias was asleep and the dishes from their celebratory supper were washed, Dustin and Samantha sat by the fire, a comfortable silence between them. "You're good with him," she said finally. "He adores you." Dustin smiled. "He's a fine boy." "You've done well raising him alone." "It hasn't been easy," she hesitated. "Before you came, I'd been struggling, not just with being ill, with everything. The isolation, the endless work, trying to be both mother and father." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I've been praying for help, for some sign that we would be all right. And then I showed up," Dustin said softly, understanding dawning. "With your son in my arms." She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building since that first day. "Samantha," he began, not entirely sure what he intended to say. "It's getting late," she said quickly, rising. "You should probably head back to town." He stood as well, recognizing her retreat for what it was, not rejection, but caution. "Of course, I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right. Help with any chores before I move my things to Jameson's, to my place." "We'd like that." At the door he paused, hat in hand. "Samantha, I want you to know, finding you and Tobias, it's been—" He searched for the right words. "It's given me purpose again. After the war, I didn't think I'd ever feel like I belonged anywhere. Now I do." She touched his arm lightly, the brief contact sending warmth through him. "Good night, Dustin." "Good night." The following weeks were busy ones for Dustin. Moving into his new property, acquiring necessary supplies, beginning the process of making the place truly his own, all of it consumed his days. But he made time to visit the Miller homestead every few days, often bringing small gifts. A jar of honey from town, a wooden toy he'd whittled for Tobias, wildflowers gathered along the way. Each visit strengthened the bond between them, though both he and Samantha maintained a careful distance. She was a widow still finding her footing, he was a newcomer establishing himself. And yet, the attraction between them was undeniable, evident in lingering glances and conversations that stretched late into the evening. In town, people had begun to take notice. Widow Parsons, never one to miss an opportunity for well-meaning interference, cornered Dustin one day outside the general store. "That Miller boy needs a father," she stated bluntly, "and his mother needs a husband." Dustin adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with her directness. "Mrs. Miller is quite capable on her own. Capability isn't the point, the older woman retorted. Happiness is, and anyone with eyes can see you make each other happy. He couldn't deny it. Being with Samantha and Tobias brought him a joy he'd never expected to find. I'm not sure she's ready, he said carefully. Widow Parsons snorted. Then help her get ready, court her proper like a gentleman, show her there's more to life than just surviving. The advice, though blunt, struck Dustin as sound. He'd been hesitating out of respect for Samantha's independence and her past. Perhaps it was time to show his intentions more clearly. His opportunity came sooner than expected. Returning to his cabin that evening, he found Samantha waiting on his porch, looking nervous but determined. Tobias was not with her. Samantha, he said, surprise and pleasure coloring his voice as he dismounted. Is everything all right? Yes, she said quickly. Mrs. Parsons is watching Tobias. I wanted to speak with you privately. Dustin's heart began to pound as he secured his horse. Whatever she had to say, it was important enough that she'd come to him alone, breaking the unspoken rules of propriety they'd been following. Come in, he offered, opening the door to his cabin. It was simple inside: a bed, a table, a few chairs, but he'd made an effort to make it homey, with a colorful quilt purchased in town and shelves he'd built himself. Samantha entered, her gaze taking in the space. You've done well here, thank you, he gestured to a chair. Would you like to sit? I can make coffee. No, thank you. She remained standing, her hands clasped before her. I won't stay long, I just needed to say. She took a deep breath. I'm grateful for all you've done for Tobias and me, but I can't accept any more of your help. The words hit him like a physical blow. I don't understand. People are talking, she explained, her cheeks flushing. About us, about your frequent visits, your gifts. It's creating expectations. Expectations, he repeated, struggling to follow her reasoning. That we might, that you and I, she couldn't finish. Understanding dawned. And that bothers you, he said quietly. The idea of us together? No, the force of her denial surprised them both. She moderated her tone. No, that's not it at all, but I can't allow you to feel obligated to us because of circumstances. You rescued my son, nursed me through illness. That doesn't mean you owe us anything more. Dustin stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then, slowly, he began to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh born of pure relief. Samantha's expression shifted from anxious to indignant. I don't see what's so amusing. Forgive me, he said, sobering quickly. It's just I thought you were here to tell me you didn't share my feelings, that you wanted me to stop coming around because you weren't interested in me that way. Your feelings, she echoed, confusion evident in her voice. Dustin closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. Samantha Miller, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I first saw you, even half dead with fever as you were. It has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with admiring your strength, your kindness, your devotion to your son. He smiled gently. I've been trying to find the courage to court you properly, but I wasn't sure if you were ready, or if you could ever see a roughened cowboy like me as worthy of you. Her eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and hope dawning in their depths. You love me. More than I thought possible, he admitted. You and Tobias both. I want to build a life here with the two of you in it however you'll have me. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were accompanied by a smile that transformed her face. I thought I was imagining it the way you looked at me, the care in your touch. I told myself it was gratitude I was feeling, not love. She reached out, tentatively placing her palm against his chest. But it is love, has been for some time now. Dustin covered her hand with his own, his heart hammering beneath her touch. May I kiss you, Samantha? Her answer was to rise on her toes, meeting him halfway as he bent his head to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a tender exploration, but it quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged yearning broke free. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Well, Samantha said, her voice unsteady, I suppose that settles the matter of expectations. Dustin laughed, drawing her into his arms again. I expect I'll be calling on Reverend Taylor soon, if you've no objection. None at all, she whispered against his shoulder. None at all. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Broken Creek, with Tobias proudly serving as ring bearer and the entire town in attendance. Sheriff Hodge stood as Dustin's best man, while Widow Parsons, looking smugly satisfied, attended Samantha. The celebration afterward was held at Dustin's, now their ranch, which the newlyweds had decided would be their home. It offered more space than Samantha's cabin, with room to grow both their family and their enterprise. As twilight fell and the last guests departed, Dustin found his new wife standing on the porch, gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tobias had finally succumbed to the excitement of the day and was sleeping soundly inside. Happy. Dustin asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Samantha leaned back against his chest. More than I ever thought possible. She turned in his embrace to face him. When James died, I thought that was the end of that part of my life, that Tobias and I would just endure, survive. Her eyes shone in the gathering darkness. I never imagined I could feel this way again. I never imagined I could feel this way at all, Dustin admitted. I'd resigned myself to a solitary life. And then you heard a child crying in the dust, she said softly. He nodded, remembering that moment with perfect clarity, the terror, the determination, the split-second decision that had changed everything. Providence, Mrs. Zachary, nothing less. Providence, she agreed, rising to meet his kiss. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Zachary family. The ranch prospered under Dustin's careful management, growing from a modest homestead to a respectable operation with a growing herd of cattle and several fine horses. Samantha turned her skills as a homemaker into a small side business, selling preserves and baked goods in town that quickly became famous throughout the county. Tobias thrived with Dustin's guidance, growing from a solemn toddler into a confident boy who rode like he was born to the saddle and took his responsibilities on the ranch with utmost seriousness. Dustin legally adopted him on his 6th birthday, a day marked by tears of joy from both parents. The family expanded with the birth of a daughter, Emma, 18 months after their wedding, followed by twin boys, Michael and Joseph, 2 years later. Their home, once a bachelor's sparse cabin, became a warm, bustling center of family life, expanded room by room as their needs grew. They never forgot how their story began with a child's cry, a desperate rescue, and an answered prayer. Each year, on the anniversary of the day Dustin found Tobias in the street, they held a special family dinner, reminding their children of how faith and courage had brought them together. On one such anniversary, when Tobias was 10, the boy, nearly a young man now, asked a question that had clearly been on his mind for some time. "Pa," he said, using the name he'd bestowed on Dustin years ago, "weren't you scared, running out into all that shooting to get me?" Dustin considered the question carefully, aware that Samantha was listening from where she sat mending by the fire, the younger children already in bed. "I was terrified," he admitted finally. "But sometimes, son, the right thing to do is also the most frightening. I couldn't leave you there, no matter the danger. Because you're brave," Tobias stated with the absolute conviction of childhood. Dustin smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "No, because in that moment, nothing was more important than making sure you were safe." He glanced at Samantha, their eyes meeting in shared understanding. "I didn't know then that I was rescuing my own future happiness along with you." Later, when Tobias had gone to bed and they were alone, Samantha came to sit beside Dustin on the porch, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You know, I've never properly thanked you," she said. He squeezed her hand. "For what?" "For hearing my prayers when no one else did." Dustin turned to her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "The day Tobias wandered off, before I collapsed with fever, I was at my lowest point. The work, the loneliness, the struggle to provide for him alone, it all felt overwhelming. I knelt right there in our cabin and prayed for help, for someone to come who could ease our burden, even just for a while." Her voice grew softer. "And then you appeared like something out of a storybook, carrying my son to safety." Dustin drew her closer. "I was just in the right place at the right time." "No," she contradicted gently. "You were the answer I'd been praying for. The man I didn't even know I needed until he was standing right in front of me." under the vast Colorado sky, stars scattered like diamonds above them, Dustin reflected on the strange twists of fate or providence that had led him here. From a solitary drifter to a husband, father, and landowner, all because he couldn't ignore a child's cry. "I think," he said slowly, "we saved each other." Samantha nestled against him, her presence as familiar and necessary to him now as breathing. "Yes," she agreed, "that's exactly what we did." As the years continued to pass, the Zachary Ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most prosperous and well-run operations in the region. Dustin's fair business practices and innovative farming techniques earned him respect, while Samantha's warmth and community involvement made her beloved by neighbors far and wide. Tobias grew into his role as the eldest son with grace, showing a natural talent for ranching that made Dustin's chest swell with pride. By 16, he was capable of managing significant aspects of the operation, allowing Dustin to focus on expansion and improvement. The twins, mischievous but hardworking, were following in their brother's footsteps, while Emma, now 12, had inherited her mother's skill with gardening and cooking, along with a fierce independence that amused and occasionally alarmed her parents. In 1890, 15 years after Dustin had first rescued Tobias, the family gathered to celebrate another milestone, the completion of a brand new house on their property. A spacious 2-story home with proper bedrooms for everyone, a large kitchen for Samantha, and even a dedicated office for Dustin to manage the ranch's growing business affairs. "It's too grand," Samantha protested weakly as Dustin carried her over the threshold, a gesture that made their teenage children roll their eyes and the twins giggle. "Nonsense," Dustin replied, setting her down in the entrance hall. "Nothing's too grand for the woman who made all this possible." The housewarming party that evening brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. Sheriff Hodge, now retired but still a frequent visitor, raised his glass in a toast. "To the Zacharys," he proclaimed. "Proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." As the celebration continued around them, Dustin found a quiet moment with Samantha in the new parlor, away from the bustle of guests. "Happy?" he asked, echoing the question he'd asked on their wedding night so many years before. Her answer was the same, though her eyes now held the wisdom of years shared rather than just the hope of a new beginning. "More than I ever thought possible." He drew her close, marveling at how the years had only deepened his love for her. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if I hadn't been in that street that day, if I hadn't heard Tobias crying?" She considered this, her head tilted thoughtfully. "I believe some things are meant to be, Dustin, if not that day, then another. We would have found each other somehow." "Such faith," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Faith rewarded," she corrected. "Look at what we've built together, this home, our family, our life, all because you couldn't ride past a child in need." From the dining room came the sound of laughter, their children, their friends, the community they'd become part of. Dustin thought of the solitary man he'd been before Colorado, before Samantha and Tobias. That man wouldn't recognize the life he had now, rich with connection and purpose. "I thank God every day," he said softly, "for that moment in the dust, for the chance to be the man you needed." Samantha's smile, as warm and genuine as the first time he'd seen it, was his answer. Together, they rejoined their guests, moving through the rooms of their new home rooms that would witness the continued unfolding of a love story that began with a rescue, but had become so much more. A love born in danger and nurtured through hardship had blossomed into a legacy of family, home, and belonging, proving that sometimes the most profound prayers are answered in ways we never expect, through people we never anticipated needing. And in the years to come, whenever Dustin Zachary told the story of how he found his family, he always began the same way, with a child crying in the dust, and the moment he made the decision that would change everything.